Right, what we're going to do now is have a session focusing on the local authority mobility platform in a bit more detail and talking about some more of the pragmatic issues around the local authority mobility platform. And we're going to do this in 3 sections. We're going to talk about why we need the local authority mobility platform, what we've done so far, and what we're going to do in the future. And what I want to do now is give a bit of context as to why we think we need the local authority mobility platform. Now, before I start, I've got to warn you that this presentation does contain some distressing images. Ooh. Sorry. So I'm going to do the next 10 minutes, and I'm going to talk about why we need what we're doing now, why there's a need for it. Marshall and Richard from Transport Systems Catapult are going to do a session on what they've been doing for us, how they've been delivering this project, and then John from a colleague of mine from the department is going to talk about where we're going next. So the way I want to go through this is I want to present you a presentation that was written in 2014, looking forward, you see, looking to the future. And the reason I want to do this is because when this presentation was written, this was very much about where UTMC was going to go in the future. And I think why this is useful now is because this will help me to make a point that I want to make about differentiating between what UTMC does and what LAMP does. And why LAMP isn't UTMC2, because we don't actually need UTMC2. Why LAMP is fixing some problems and some issues that have come along since 2014 when the last major sort of recast of UTMC happened. And this builds very much on the points that Matt and Graham have made earlier this morning about understanding new types of data, new opportunities, new things that we can be doing with data beyond what we traditionally thought we would be doing as highway engineers. So UTMC has been a huge success in the UK, and it fixed a problem that was very prevalent in the 1990s and the 2000s. And it was conceived in the 1990s, and it was about community ownership and national backing for open standards to plug things together, which actually is what we're talking about now. It's about community ownership and national backing to plug things together. But in those days, we were talking about this at a machine level. We were talking about doing this for systems on street. We were talking about linking car park counters and VMS signs. We were talking about linking strategy supervisors and traffic signals. We were talking about doing things in a very closed traffic engineering, UTC type world. And that's what UTMC did. And that's what it still does. And it was about authorities and suppliers working together and forming open standards. And it was about forming interfaces to allow us to implement plug and play, or plug and pray, as it often turned into. About linking different manufacturers' equipment together and opening markets. And it was policy neutral and technology neutral. It's about building systems that would allow you to build the traffic management system that you wanted for your city out of the components that were available. And it was also about giving the market some security, some understanding of the types of things and the types of interfaces it should be building based on the things it could predict that local authorities and their consultants would be procuring. So it was all very good stuff. It was all very important. And it was built around a framework. It was built around a framework which actually isn't that different from today. And it had the kind of aspirations that we have today. And it had aspirations around bringing external systems and public information, linking them to in-stations and outstations and control units, and blending data to control technology, but in quite a small, specific urban traffic control type way. But it also had an interest in vehicles, which it never really delivered because it was never really the right technology. But even in 2014, we were thinking that ultimately we would want to collect data from vehicles. Now, most of what UTMC did is still valid today, and most of what UTMC did can still be done and probably should still be done in a UTMC fashion. The problem with UTMC is it never, because of the time it was written, it didn't have the vision of how the world would expand and how opportunities around data would expand and how vehicle connectivity would unroll and how the ability to open large data sets and do the kind of things that we see commercially in some of the big commercial search engine and social media companies, how that type of technology would grow so quickly, and how the ability to analyse data and analyse very disparate types of data and come up with very interesting conclusions and strategies based on it, how that would grow. And so the point of LAMP, the point of the mobility platform, which is actually a framework, but LAMP doesn't sound quite as catchy as LAMP, the point of that is that sits over the top of this. That expands the types of things we do now, and it coalesces them together. It opens up data in silos across many areas and allows us to form those complex, slightly esoteric linkages between data that we want to do. We shouldn't forget that UTMC has been a huge success, and it's still widely specified by local authorities and by their consultants. It's used widely across the UK. I think when Graham asked for a show of hands, most of you had heard of it. And I would expect most of you, somewhere in your authority, have large or small systems that conform to the UTMC standards. And it's actually been an export success as well. It's widely recognised around the world as a standard, and it is widely used. And even in Europe, even among countries that we often aspire to, like Germany, they accept that the UTMC model, that the public ownership, the public-private sectors working together, writing standards which were then implemented, is a really good way of doing it. And actually, in a lot of ways, is better than the OSIT type model that the Germans use. It's actually a very good way of doing it. And as we move forward, as we move into LAMP, and as we start to think about that, we need to not lose that 25 years and that millions of pounds of investment and the opportunities that UTMC has thrown out. But we do need to take those UTMC basics and expand them. And we do need to start to think about UTMC and bus rail time and rail data and car parking data and all the other types of siloed data that we often have in our authorities. We need to start to think of those as parts of a bigger picture. And we need to start to build the technologies, the platforms that allow us to link those together and do the types of things that we should be able to do with that data. And consume data from the private sector. And look at savings that we could make from, say, using floating vehicle data rather than running our own detectors. Use data that we can collect from mobile phone uses rather than from our own Bluetooth devices, and so on and so on. We need UTMC and its other sort of parallel detailed level technologies and detailed level specifications. We need them to be able to work together, and that's what LAMP is very much about. That's the kind of thing that we intended UTMC would do back in the day, and it still does. And it still does that very well. And actually, even today, if I wanted to connect from an in-station to a VMS sign, I would probably use the UTMC standards because that's about as good as it gets. At that level, the technologies are still right. At that electromechanical level of linking databases through some kind of IP comms medium to a device on street, that's still what it does well. And LAMP isn't about reinventing that. LAMP's not about changing that. LAMP's about ensuring that as we build those systems, as we put that technology out there, we can do a lot more with the data we can get from it. We can write more complex strategies about how we control it. And we can link the types of data we're getting, the types of data that other parts of our authorities, other public bodies, private sector bodies, we can link that together in much more intelligent ways. And actually, UTMC does do most of that. That was pretty much where we thought we would be in 2014, and we are. The reason really for talking about this in terms of 2014 is that was probably the high point of UTMC. UTMC is managed by a community company. It's managed by a body called the UDG, the UTMC Development Group. And 2014 was probably the high point of the UDG aspiring to UTMC being the overall standards that glued the things we do together. And since 2014, it's become increasingly apparent that there's actually a bigger picture, there's actually a bigger opportunity here, which technology standards written specifically around urban traffic control could never meet. And so UTMC never really developed much beyond 2014, and it's still around, and the standards are still maintained, but its aspiration for growth kind of slowed around that time because it became apparent that the questions we needed to answer were much bigger questions, and the way the market was going was much bigger than just dealing with specific technology standards around those types of systems. So this is really the high point of that UTMC-based linking outstations to database type model, and beyond then we've moved somewhere else. So the fact that UTMC hasn't really developed that much over recent years because the challenges have been beyond the technology that it was based on, or why we need LAMP now. We need now to look and say, well, actually, how do we continue to do the day job, continue to specify the right types of technology to control that type of equipment in an effective and efficient manner, but link that into the wider systems and meet the wider challenges that Matt outlined earlier and that Graham talked about in some of the challenge work that we're doing. And that's why I'm replaying a slide from slides from 2014. It's not because I couldn't be bothered to write a new presentation for today, because I could have found a more recent one to do if I wanted to do that. So again, that's where we wanted to be with UTMC. And fundamentally, that's kind of where LAMP is, but more so. And actually, UTMC delivered a lot of that on the left-hand side. It wasn't, in the end, it turns out, it wasn't quite the right thing to deliver the right-hand side. It wasn't the right types of technology to form linkages with vehicles and mobiles and other things. And certainly, in terms of vehicles, back in 2014, we had no way of predicting how CAVs would develop. We had no way of predicting how the wider standards to do with cooperative messaging and decentralized network warning and signal phase and timing and the types of things that UTMC, the types of things that vehicles will deliver now. We had no way of understanding how that would work and how it would develop in a way that was much more based on more modern data science principles than the ones that UTC were. And so although that was a vision, it's quite clear by 2014 that it probably never would deliver that. And that's why, again, LAMP is now very much what we should be focusing on, to build that right-hand side of the diagram. So that's what we wanted to do back in 2014 as well. Now, the interesting thing about that is that some of that stuff we still want to do, and some of that stuff we maybe don't want to do much anymore. Bluetooth journey time is something that a lot of us do. A lot of us have Bluetooth out there. And some systems have been around for quite a while, and it looked like a way to do quite cheap journey time monitoring. Now in 2019, if you were building a new system and you had the opportunity to buy data from Inrix or TomTom or do something like that, would you actually go and buy your own Bluetooth counters? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. There were lots of things on there. There were lots of aspirations on there that actually the UTMC never really delivered, but now clearly are deliverable through the LAMP protocol. So where does all this fit in terms of how we do the day job? Well, I think you can kind of think about the way that we do why we do transport in local authorities. You can think about it in that kind of sort of like model. We're all driven by policy drivers. We're all driven by the thing that got the councillors elected. We're all driven by our authorities having some high-level policy objectives, some aims, something that was in the agenda of the ruling party. And that doesn't change that quickly, but that's actually what the council, that's what the council is telling the public it will deliver, and that's what the councillors are interested in. It's very high-level stuff. And we deliver those policy drivers by delivering services. Now, whether those services are to do with children's services or education or parking, we deliver quite wide-ranging services that are the means by which we meet the policy drivers that the elected members and senior management have set us. And within each of the services, we will have systems. Well, the council will run systems. It will run a UTC system, for example. It will run a parking system, for example, all within the highway management or the UTC service. The authority has to buy technologies to deliver the services. And actually, the services are what the council is interested in. The service is a thing that you will specify. I want to buy a service to do UTC, for example. The technologies are how the industry will respond to you. We will deliver your UTC service by offering you this technology. And fundamentally, that's all based on some form of standards, be it UTMC, be it standards around traffic signals or whatever. There's some standards in there. UTMC fundamentally works at the interface between systems and technologies. I want to buy a system to put VMS signs around my city. Right, okay, the technology you should use to do that is the UTMC VMS data object. That's how you should specify them. That's where we have been, and that's where traditionally we've been concentrating on how we use technology. LAMP sits higher up. LAMP is about how we deliver services and how we find the wider business cases for services and policies. So LAMP is about saying, well, actually, there are completely new ways in which we can deliver a service. There are completely new ways in which we can deliver the policies the council wants to deliver. There are data stored in different silos down in the systems that we run across the authority to do all sorts of different things. There are data stored in those systems that could be much more useful, that could do new things and allow us to deliver services better, more effectively, deliver new services, meet the kind of challenges that new technology is presenting us with. And, you know, as we move into a world where we live more and more by our mobile phones and by mobile apps and so forth, how do we build public services that respond to that changing way in which people want to consume data, want to integrate with interrelate to services and so on and so forth? LAMP allows us to start doing that. LAMP allows us to start thinking about how that platform would work at that level. And the business cases for LAMP, the reason why we should do it kind of cross-cut through that. It's about finding better ways of using technology. It's about delivering better systems that are more agile and more suited to the modern world, linking those into services that are more suited to the types of aspirations councils have, and ultimately delivering policy drivers. And the reasons that each authority finds for using something like LAMP and the benefits it finds from using the LAMP protocols and the LAMP framework that we develop will be about the authorities finding the business cases. So that's kind of a bit of a principle. So in terms of where LAMP goes next, well, that's a massive ask. That could be a million different things. So how do we focus that in? How do we get from this idea of we understand some of the technologies, we know about the traffic signals, we know about VMS, we know about car parking, we know about the systems that we run. How do we relate that to the million different policy objectives that could meet and the million different ways you could reconfigure services to deliver that? Well, what we do is we base it on something. I don't intend to go through this line by line, you're pleased to know. Graham will later on there. A few years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago now, a European-funded consortium produced something called the CIMEC report. And what the CIMEC report did was, it looked at what cities wanted to do. It looked at this thing about cities delivering services, and it worked out some of the things that cities would like to do on the one hand, and on the other hand, it went away and talked to vehicle manufacturers and technology manufacturers and got an idea of the art of the possible, what vehicle technologies would likely to be delivering in the next 5 or 10 years. And it merged the two together. And it said, well, based on the art of the possible, based on what vehicles are likely to be doing in the next few years and what data they're likely to be producing, what opportunities does that open up for authorities? And it formed 18 use cases from things like you in the future, using the vehicles that are on your street, will be able to develop systems that allow you to individually route vehicles, to have in-vehicle signage, to have better parking management, better management of vulnerable road users, and so on and so forth. It gave some things that cities could aspire to doing in the future based on where technology is likely to be going. And this is very much where LAMP sits. LAMP sits in this idea of, okay, that's what we are told the technology will allow us to do. That's the type of ways in which we could reconfigure the services we deliver to meet the council objectives. How do we do it? Well, the point of the LAMP framework is to help us do that, help us link the underlying technologies that we already understand and the standards we already have with this aspiration to do wider things. And we've picked some out, and at the moment we're looking at some very specific use cases, and this is because LAMP could be a very big thing, it could be enormous. We have a limited amount of research funding to spend on it and a limited amount of time to do it. And what we actually want to do at the moment is we want to prove the concept. We want to prove that there is actually a need for LAMP, that it actually serves a purpose and there is a real business case for doing that. And that once we've written that business case, we can write it in a way that's useful to you as authorities, to you to use as a business case, to go to your members and get them to understand why investing in this is worthwhile and why there's a return on this. So we've picked 2 particular ones. We're looking at access control for air quality management and parking management. There's been 2 key issues that people are interested in, areas where, as an initial sort of stage of LAMP, we can prove a benefit in having it. And so that's where we are now. That's why we've got to where we are, and that's where we are now, which I think is a great time to hand over to Marcel and Richard, or Marcel or Richard, you.
So I've been asked kind of to give a summary of where we are with the project. So I'm the technical lead, and my colleague Richard Tusting has been supporting this project. So just to start with, we started the project in May of last year, and we're actually at nearing the end of the current phase of this project, and obviously John will discuss where we go with this in the future. So today I'm just going to kind of share with you what we did. So we did some interviews and workshops, did some analysis around that, and then started to build up the kind of framework, the user cases associated with that, and then a kind of overall business case. So first part really was about, and the reason we kind of split this off was because we didn't want to influence where the project direction would go. So we had interviews separately with a number of the companies you see below, and some of those are actually SMEs, so it was quite interesting conversations we had. But also a number of government departments, and the purpose of that really was just trying to make sure there was no duplication, and that actually if there were initiatives that were in other government departments, it would be useful to understand those and see if we can then link them to the project we were doing. Oh, there you are. So some of just very quick conclusion really was pain-free access to local authority data was coming from industry, a stable policy in the market to allow for investment in their own solutions. Data is always needed but hard to procure and share, and maybe some of you might relate to some of that. Mobility service is a good thing, but the right infrastructure has to be in place, and kind of consistency and solutions to be deliverable to the whole of the UK market. So that was some of the kind of thoughts, certainly from industry. So second part was to then run 3 workshops. We did it fairly geographical through the UK, so 52 representatives of local authorities. I know some of them are in here today, so that's really useful. And they were really good, because part of the workshop really was just trying to pull out that evidence. So we run a number of themes. One of those was about personas, so the people that operate within a local authority, maybe suppliers or services. You know, what's their kind of role, what's some of the benefits they would see from a local mobility platform. So these are some of the kind of summaries really. So again, access to their own data, which is I find really interesting, how you can't access your own data and it's in your own local authority. Another key point was about investing in skills. So I think it was recognition that local authorities don't necessarily have such a big team, reliant very much on third-party suppliers, and obviously people change and companies move on, and they feel that some of that skill is lost, and they're having to then reinvest. Certainly the opportunity to improve communications with customers, so we're all customers here, so a better improvement in that. Also, they're able to then recognise how they perform as a local authority. Kind of taking on some of those modern methods of how they better manage their networks, and low complexity and access to procurement. So just taking one snippet, so one section of the workshop was about data, so we're at data conference today. So recognised within that, we looked at what kind of data sources we would be interested in if we were looking at a local mobility platform for the future. So just some snippets really from this. So the first kind of first 40% recognised by the individuals at the workshop mentioned some of the core tools used by local authorities. Obviously parking was mentioned. So it was really a combination of data sources that are current, but also ones that we know are coming in the future in relation to connected vehicles. And that any new system has to be kind of an open source system that you can plug in various data sources. So just a very summary really. I mean, there's a lot of takes you can get from the whole project, but these are kind of very snippet parts of it. So I think recognition that we need to update and bring some of local authority technology to more open platform standard. And you know, there's a lot of emphasis on digital transformation. I think maintaining kind of core systems, but also sometimes stifles the market. And actually trying to move more to modern techniques. Significant amount of data locked in systems like UTMC. So how do we free that up? How do we break down some of those barriers? And then try to move to some of the benefits of open data. There's definitely a commercial and social benefit by having a local mobility platform. And there's lots of evidence that suggests that a limited commercial value associated with most local authority data. And then lastly, really, you know, so there's a big drive from government to try and modernise and digitise services in local authorities. So there is an opportunity to make it more efficient, cost effective and more customer focused. So just to break down now, so we're going into the user cases. So we looked at 3 user cases. Parking, obviously Graham has already mentioned something like that. Air quality and bus services. And what we did was basically try to follow through what the framework, the architecture would look like, and then come up with some guidance documents and these are some of the deliverables that we're intending to deliver by the end of March. And just really on the business case, hopefully some of the theme there makes sense. So looking at the engagement, pulling on the evidence that we did from those workshops, understanding the trends. So we did a roadmap to understand the vision over a kind of 20-year period, and also local authority needs. Then feeding those then into what we would say the rationale for local mobility platform, and then those direct and indirect benefits, and then understanding those impacts and those barriers. So these are the deliverables that we intend to deliver to DfT on end of March. A key one there is the deliverable 4, which is a promotional video. Hopefully that will kind of set the scene really of what we expect from local mobility platform, and hopefully some of the benefits I kind of talked about here. Workshop analysis, and then there's an internal high-level strategic case for the mobility platform. So that's my last slide, but just to note, if you're not aware, so from the 1st of April, Transport System Catapult and Future Cities Catapult will actually be combining. So we'll become Transport and Cities all under one organisation. Name yet to be decided, but I just thought I would just share if you weren't aware of that was happening. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much to Darren and to Marcel for explaining so fully the concept of LAMP. I'm John Cooper from the Traffic and Technology Smarter Traffic Management team. I work with both Darren and Graham, and I've been the project manager for DfT on the Local Authority Mobility Platform. Also, if anyone wants to talk to me later, I'm also been project manager on the National Access Point project, which was also a co-production with TSC, and happy to talk about that later if you like. So what are we going to do next on the LAMP project? Obviously it has a strong mandate and was one of the key recommendations out of the local transport data discovery that Graham mentioned. In the project itself, it's proved that there's a good business case for proceeding to a next phase. And this current project is going to finish, as Marcel has explained, in March with some good outputs. And I'm able to confirm that we've got funding secured for proceeding with the next phase as well, which is always a good thing, that we have that in our pocket now and can confidently predict that we will be doing some more work. So what we propose with LAMP Stage 2 would be obviously build on the good work that's been done so far in Phase 1. This is focuses on the work on the established stakeholder consensus delivered in the LAMP vision document, and how this will enable local authorities to embrace digitalisation in the arena of mobility. Some of the documents that Marcel's explained are aimed at ultimately being able to be given to local authorities who may in the future be coming to put together a local authority mobility platform. And we envisage that these will be put together in a kind of a toolkit. They will be able to illustrate how the use cases, some of the examples Marcel's given, parking or air quality, but also further work that will be done in the next phase to look at some more use cases. Also, we can see that there's scope perhaps for commissioning a pilot study for how LAMP could work in an actual local authority. We have the current Future Mobility Zones pilots program, and we think that by DfT partnering with a local authority, there's a viable way of taking this work forward. Darren mentioned the CIMEC use cases, and following on from the 3 use cases that Marcel's mentioned, we think that these few here could be ones that could be looked at in phase 2 of the work on LAMP. So, for example, on electric vehicles, in-vehicle traffic signs, or autonomous vehicles, and so on. We also think that in phase 2 of LAMP, there's a good case for continuing the strong stakeholder engagement that we've had in phase 1. There was the 3 workshops that Marcel mentioned, and we envisaged revisiting people who attended the various workshops, asking them what they think about the work that we've done on the project since last summer, and also obviously we'll open it up to other authorities who are keen to come in and talk to us. And I've seen various people around the room who I recognise from the workshops, so we'd love to talk to you again, and no doubt we'll be in touch in the future. As regards how we manage the future of the project, the Transport Technology Forum has been mentioned, and we envisage that a possible model for the future running of the work on LAMP phase 2 is to initiate a relationship whereby the Transport Technology Forum is responsible for taking the work forward. Now this is it's already had a soft launch managed by ARUPS for the Department for Transport. In the future, ARUPS could be in the lead, managing work on LAMP 2 and working with DfT in collaboration with the Transport Future Cities Catapult, whatever they decide to call themselves in the new year. One thing I've put in here about LAMP is what it isn't, and it came up repeatedly in the stakeholder engagement, is that people had a concept that it would be somehow a software mega project that was commissioned and delivered by the department, and that we would somehow be selling them a LAMP system and they would need to buy it off us, and it would be like that. But it's safe to say it is not that kind of project. The platform part of LAMP, as Darren touched on, it's not really just because we could get a better acronym, but it's safe to say that in the phase of work that it's just finishing on LAMP has not been about the creation of a local authority mobility platform. That point will come further down the line. We are indeed working on a framework, but what we envisage is that what is eventually rolled out by local authorities could be called a local authority mobility platform, and at that point there is a platform which they can use to run all their transport systems. So hopefully that explains quite briefly how we envisage the work continuing. Here are all our details. Feel free to talk to us later or email us after the event with your thoughts, and we'd love to hear from you. And are we able to take questions now, or are we waiting until the... we do take questions in the panel session later. But if anyone wants to come up and ask specific questions about aspects of the project, I'll be happy to take them offline, here or later. So that's all from me. Thanks very much for listening, and maybe talk to you later.